Number 3, regarding rage. This is how I titled it, regarding rage. Does his mood dictate the entire environment of the home? Do you and or your children gauge him to determine how to act in your own home? Does he hit walls, throw things, or approach with clenched fists? Use this as a test. Think of the best, most honorable man you know and apply your partner's behavior to him. Would this honorable man corner you or stand over you dominantly? Would he, this honorable man, purposely keep you in line by simply using his size? So he doesn't have to hit you. I was not hit, but each of those things I listed happened. And so just as a rule of thumb for any of these I read, think of the most honorable man you know, whether it be your dad, a grandpa, anybody you've ever met that you could never imagine being afraid of, and put your partner's behavior on that person. And if it seems really odd, then you're not seeing good things in your marriage.
I'm Todd, and I was naughty. I did everything wrong. I got kicked out of art school, I drank heavily, and I looked to other religions and versions of spirituality to get fulfilled. The problem was, I was in the occult and I didn't even know it. My life was a wreck, and I had to learn what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus.
And I'm Laura. I was super nice. I did everything right. I got saved young, went to Moody Bible Institute, got married, and followed the Christian rules to having a good life. Problem was, that formula didn't work. I had to change how I related with Jesus.
At the end of the day, what I learned is the very simple truth.
Jesus is the answer, the only answer,
And the only one that will ever actually fulfill you.
naughty
versus
nice.
Welcome back to Naughty versus Nice. I'm Todd.
And I'm Laura.
And we do have...
Of course I'm Kelly.
There, that's it right there.
Are you lovely wife, Kelly?
Oh.
My difficult yet charming wife, Kelly, running the boards. Are we number 3 or number 4? Where are we at on this?
This is number 4.
Number 4, we're doing a divorce series. So we're talking, most Christian podcasts are going to be like, let's talk about marriage. And let's do a marriage here. And we're like, no, we're not joking. We are dark. That's just where
Not
we go.
me.
Yeah, where we go. Yeah, except for you, little Miss Bright Optimism. We should just call you Optimistic Kelly. So,
Moving right along.
Slightly awkward Todd and Optimistic Kelly. So we're talking about the nature of marriage, how God views divorce, why divorce even exists as a concept within the Bible at all, how it shows up, and how the modern day church gets a few parts of it wrong. Once again, the church isn't 100% wrong on this. I can appreciate the idea of wanting marriages to stay together. It is a gift from God, and it's clearly visible within the context of the story of Adam and Eve and how that all comes about. But there are additional details that seem to get lost, and the verses that always the go-to for church seem to be kind of these New Testament verses and one comment specifically in the Old Testament, and all the rest of the Old Testament just seems to be forgotten about.
Yeah, that seems to be the trend in almost every regard, though.
Right.
The Old Testament. A couple of things that kind of struck me this week, because we did focus a lot on Adam and Eve and what it looked like, and we took it from the angle of that being a prefigurement of Christ, but with the emphasis being on the role of the husband in that. And then you jumped us to Ephesians 5, which if you take time to read that, it's going to focus a lot more in detail about the role of the husband than the wife. And so I kind of thought about that, and I thought, well, that seems almost like we're putting more responsibility on him. But I think that's biblical. And so I was thinking about it, like, why, in my brain, and I don't know how my brain works. It just does. But we had talked several weeks ago about John 15, and we had gone through that passage in the Bible study that we're all in. And he had explained that when Christ says he's going away to make a place for us, that he is going to do the work of the cross to create a dwelling place within the Trinity for us to be in fellowship with him. And then the instruction that he gives to the disciples is that they abide in that. And so the way he kind of explained it translates in my mind. So these are not, I don't think, his words. So if they're wrong, it's me. In my mind, it's a picture like he's created a little cubbyhole in the body of Christ that belongs to us, and that exists. It exists because of his work, and so those who have been given that, that's not shakeable. But then, as he says to the disciples, you must abide, you must lean in, you must make your home with us. There is a responsibility, an obligation of response to the relationship that he has bought, the place he has given them. And so in that way, I kind of was thinking, as we're placing greater responsibility on the husband when we're giving these examples, I do think that as an analogy can kind of fit, that a husband's responsibility is to build that nook, that dwelling place within the relationship that has security, intimacy, provision, and then a wife's responsibility, I hate that word, but her reaction to that is one of leaning into it and to building it with him. It's much more responsive than active. So I don't know if that makes any of the illustrations we've been using as far as focusing on Adam, focusing on the role of the husband, if that makes it any clearer as we kind of are trying to give the best picture of what a marriage should look like so that the church now knows what we're defending. And so in the cases where the marriage does not demonstrate that and it actually demonstrates the opposite, the church should be stepping in and actually helping that end in those bad situations. Does that make sense, or have I lost it?
It does to me. One of the things that I'll say over and over again, especially within the occult, we tend to want to one-to-one something, meaning we want to see something going on in the occult and have something not in the occult that we can directly compare it to and make it that one-to-one ratio. And I keep saying over and over again, it's not a one-to-one. It's more ideas, more concepts. Whereas within Christianity is not the opposite of the occult, or the occult's not the opposite of Christianity. It fluctuates. But in this instance, we do see a one-to-one happening here. So we have that relationship between man and wife in that marriage, and the husband and his bride and his responsibilities to her. And then, like you're saying, her to lean into him and trust in that relationship, trust in that in that he's going to fulfill his responsibilities, and he's not a bologna sandwich, so to speak, if you know what I'm saying. Like
I don't.
No, I had like three different things go through my head. I'm like, I'm not going to say that, not going to say that. I'll just go with the,
baloney. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's phony baloney, okay? And that kind of thing. But we see that within Christ. It's a one-to-one relationship there. We get the constant metaphor that the church is Christ's bride. We get the metaphor where he says, I go to prepare a place for you. That is an illustration that the Jews at the time would have understood because of the way that the man would go to court his, to propose. She would wait, get prepared in her home, then he would go to prepare a place for her in his father's abode. So in his father's property, in his father's household, he would prepare a home for just them, and then she had to be ready at any time for him to come back and collect her, and she would keep that candle burning in the window. So it was sort of the tradition of things, of that marriage ritual of what they would do even before they got married. It would show up and Christ would use as an example. So we see this one-to-one happening all the time. Christ is going to fulfill his responsibilities. He's going to do what he says he's going to do. He's going to complete the work on the cross. He's going to prepare the abode for us. He's going to do all these things. And our responsibility as that bride is to then lean into him, give our full and complete trust, knowing that he is going to fulfill all of the promises that he's made.
I agree. I think we can just end now, right?
Except we haven't talked about what we're actually supposed to talk about.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
We just gave our little sermons for the night. We're done.
We won podcasting. We're done. All right. We totally won. So, my position. I'm always going to go to, it's the guy's responsibility. That's, how it all sets up. So you have within the archetype of the male, on one side, you're going to have this like tyrannical king. How does bad behavior show up in men? You're going to have this like one side tyrannical king. It's easy to see. He's a super jerk, real controlling, real domineering. He's toxically masculine, according to, popular culture the way it is today. The other one that's not easy to see is this passive, kind of lazy, do nothing, know nothing, but they show up as a really nice guy. So they're very agreeable, very cooperative, and they never really take a stand on absolutely anything. And they show up as a nice guy, so it's not as easy to see, but they're not fulfilling their obligations and responsibilities, especially to their wife.
That's been the most frustrating part with my own experience was you could pick up the book, such good resources like the Sociopath Next Door, anything like that. And they're going to list out these lists, and it's going to be, these are the things you look for your sociopathic partner. And I would think my husband didn't quite meet those, and he was there, but he wasn't. And so it became discouraging because something's gone terribly wrong, and you feel the effect of it well after the marriage had ended, but I couldn't figure out how to describe it. And so I did find a really, really great book, The Covert Passive-Aggressive Narcissist. And so what I did to prepare for this lesson was I went through that, reviewed that book, some of the things she kind of suggests might be happening in a relationship that you can then see. So I have a list that I just created. They're mostly from my own experience. So I am very careful that if a woman has told me something in meeting with them, nothing that's said on this show is anybody but mine. And if it's not mine, it's an example I read in a book. So just to be clear that if somebody heard something, you just know you're not the only one who's seeing the same pattern, basically. What I did was just list it out.
Before you go ahead and do that, I want to jump in real quick. You mentioned up that covert narcissist concept, and this is something that, once again, it's not easy to see. And actually, my research and everything we did in preparing for this episode, I went ahead and just defined it because it is a very dominant characteristic, at least with on the abusive woman side, and how that would kind of show up. So the covert narcissist is known as a vulnerable narcissist. They hide their sense of superiority behind humility or victimhood. They often engage in passive-aggressive behaviors. They seek sympathy and exhibit hypersensitivity to criticism. And that seeking of sympathy, it's almost like it's a currency. It's almost like something they barter with in a strange sort of way. And despite their subtlety, they can crave admiration and validation. They often think they're the smartest or most important person in the room, and they're constantly kind of fishing for these very strange compliments. It's not as overt as somebody who maybe is, outgoing and very charming would, but they often they feel very envious of other people's success, and it's not even envy as much as it's more like wrecking the game. If somebody else has success, it's not that they don't deserve it and that the narcissist does, yes, but they also want to wreck it entirely so that way that person can never have success or anything like that again. So once again, keeping all of the things that Laura and I are about to kind of point out in mind, you're going to hear so many things that Laura brings up, that fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt. It all capitalizes on shame. You're going to see that as being the attempt to provoke that in the victim by these behaviors and these examples.
And it can even that description that you read, like I can think back and you wouldn't have met my husband and thought that, like he wouldn't, like if somebody else won an award, it would be like, oh, that's great. It wasn't always obvious. So I'm hoping, especially if you're a woman listening, that you will kind of treat this like one of those, surveys. Just any of these, check one if you hear one that sounds like familiar. I tried to flesh them out. All right. So one of the first ones. Do you suspect or do you know pornography is being used? Has he normalized it, ridiculed you for asking, defended his right to view it, attempted to make what he's viewed a part of your sex relationship, pushed you beyond your own personal boundaries? Most women that I meet with, porn's on the table. And if they don't know it is, I can tell it is just based on some of the things that he has said, done, asked for, and if he's angry. Those are usually the symptoms I look for. Does he have a low view of women? Does he quote seemingly biblical ideas about a woman's worth in marriage, the church, or the home? Does he say things like, your role in this home is to cook, clean, and make sure I'm always sexually attended to?
I said over and over, there's almost like a direct quote, and it's vulgar, and I don't exactly want to say it.
I know what it is. Okay. Number 3. Regarding rage, this is how I titled it, regarding rage. Does his mood dictate the entire environment of the home? Do you and or your children gauge him to determine how to act in your own home? Does he hit walls, throw things, or approach with clenched fists? Use this as a test. Think of the best, most honorable man you know and apply your partner's behavior to him. Would this honorable man corner you or stand over you dominantly? Would he, this honorable man, purposely keep you in line by simply using his size? So he doesn't have to hit you. I was not hit. but each of those things I listed happened. And so just as a rule of thumb for any of these I read, think of the most honorable man you know, whether it be your dad or grandpa, anybody you've ever met that you could never imagine being afraid of, and put your partner's behavior on that person. And if it seems really odd, then you're not seeing good things in your marriage.
Your primary, it becomes clear that your primary role and function is to keep the peace within your household or something like that. You're the one that's always trying to sense what's going on in the room, what the feel is, and trying to make sure that everything's staying okay. And you're always walking on eggshells, and you're just waiting for that next explosion to happen, and it's going to happen. It's not in your head.
One a counselor in the situation used the example. She said when we were reaching the end where we were going to separate, she said he has set a bomb off in a car, and you are doing everything you can to insulate the car, keep the door shut, protect everybody, protect the children, protect the marriage. But at the end of the day, you need to let the bomb go off. And I think it speaks to that kind of reaction where you feel like you have to hold it together. You got to make sure he's okay, the kids are okay. But in the end, he's the problem. You aren't. You're just facilitating it because you're trying to manage it and make sure it doesn't blow up.
Basically. And that's one of the ways that the victims blame themselves because they're not doing enough or not doing it correctly, and that's why the volatility is happening.
Mm-hmm. He would, let's see, does he do things to disrupt peace and order? Examples might be waking you in the night just to interrupt sleep, interrupt phone conversations, or even go around turning appliances on randomly. Just anything to reassert the idea that he controls the mood of the room, the sound of the room. Your rest, your relaxation, your separation from him is never definitive. It has to be something he controls. Has he ever threatened to kick you out? Has he locked you in or out of your home? I have said to women before, if he has one time said, I'm going to lock you out, if he has one time locked you in, or he has done it, he has kicked you out, put your stuff in the hallway, you consider yourself done. Because that's not, I don't know good men who do that and then turn around and then are awesome again. I consider that a strong red flag, and I would encourage you to consider ending it, especially if you're not married yet. Get out.
Well, and let's even look back at the biblical examples we were talking about on the last episode. It's the idea of putting her out or pushing her outside of that safety of the home, of the dwelling. It is a dispossession. It's and on a certain level symbolic of that. And so it's not an insignificant gesture to do that to another person. You're not doing it because it's going to make her feel better and everything's going to make everything better and happier. You're doing it to prove a point, to be a jerk, and to emphasize power or whatever the expression is you're trying to accomplish. It's done with malice.
It's similar to when you have children. If there's a situation where a kid is throwing a tantrum, there's a part of you that wants to end it. And so a lot of my personal experience was a parent would be like, fine, I'm going to leave. Or fine, this. Or they always up the ante. Like, you have a feeling, but I'm not going to acknowledge that. Instead, I'm going to make my feeling bigger and remind you can't have that feeling. It's those kinds of ideas, I think, are in there as well. Do you instinctively know you are not allowed much or any anger to show? Are you allowed to give priority to your emotions over his? We were not married very long, and we got in a fight, and I voiced myself. I remember feeling pretty, good about the fact that I was comfortable being angry, and that there were repercussions. So that's not it. That's how as if you should be able to be ticked off, yourself and not be corralled after in some way. I don't know how else to put that.
You get to be a normal person in your own home, and you're being punished for having expressions of behavior that's not approved. That kind of thing. There's an example of what kind of shows up when men are abused by women. Similar thing. It just shows up just a little bit differently. One of the ways would be if a guy expresses disappointment or expresses that their feelings got hurt. And yes, men have feelings. Part of the vulnerability of marriage is that you're trusting somebody with the true essence of who you are. That Kelly can hurt me in ways nobody else on the planet can. And there's a trust that happens there. And when the aggressive woman or the the hostile version of that character comes out, they go for that jugular. And when that happens, then they become appalled. They get mad at the husband. They get disgusted with them for actually being hurt by them when the purpose of them doing it was to hurt them. So it's this like double blame kind of thing. It's very strange where it's, stabbing somebody and then getting mad they're bleeding all over your floor.
And it doesn't show up as easily in women. We say that all the time. And so if you are in a situation where you suspect it, I'd say do the same thing I said earlier about finding the honorable man, but instead take the behavior of the wife and pretend it was the behavior of the husband. And if you kind of recoil, there's a problem. She's just getting away with it because she's hiding behind being a woman. And that somehow blinds us to it. It is harder to see, just at least in our generation and in our culture in America. That's a hard thing to see. Does he respond well to personal boundaries such as reserved time for self, sexual preferences and availability, or time with others, including children? Have you ever, even once, questioned your safety? If he's ever said, ever, I'd never hurt you, he's already made it a question. So often women say, but he said, I would never hurt you. I would never hurt you. You should never have to affirm. I don't ever picture you saying that to Kelly unless one of you had Alzheimer's. It just doesn't fit that she's going to feel afraid. So you shouldn't have to assure her because she shouldn't need that if she feels safe. Has there been employment issues? Most commonly, at least in the experiences that I've had with women, it's unemployment characterized by lateness, laziness, and poor work habits. But it can also be on that kind of that tyrannical side. It's the workaholic, the controlling, that kind of energy where they can be a very hard worker, but it's a workaholic, quote, that kind of atmosphere a little bit more. As far as being deceptive, have you found him in any lies, where he's been, his interactions with porn, or how he's using money? Is he proficient in garnering sympathy? This can be achieved by tears and sorries, or also by depression that elicits concern. Obviously, people get depressed, but there's just a certain way that it can be worn where you, in seeing it in your partner, you then feel you have to cater more to the things that they're asking of you because they're depressed. And I believe, in my experience, there was capitalization on, my mom had been suicidal her whole life, and she did kill herself. Then I think that was capitalized, that fear was kind of catered to. I don't think that was ever going to happen, but the depression and the slightly suicidal thing kind of kept me keeping the bomb from going off. I don't know. Does this fit with women too? I don't know on that one.
Once again, it's that concept of that victim narcissist. So it's the over-the-top leveraging of emotional blackmail in order to get what they're trying to achieve, the goals that they're trying to achieve that they've set for themselves. Of course, these are not goals that are like said out loud, but we hit that the concept of that fog: fear, obligation, and guilt, mm-hmm. and all three of those laser focused together in order to like hyperactivate the victim's sense of shame, and not victim narcissist, the narcissist's victim. So if it's the woman who is the narcissist, her husband, or even the kids, by keeping them in a permanent state of shame, which, by the way, is kind of hand in glove within the concepts of Christian culture, too, you already recognize you're a sinner. So you already have this knowledge about who you are and how you show up in the world. And it'll be this almost hyper emphasis on everything to bring about more shame in you in order to get you under control, to get you to do until you're trained. And then you'll kind of just run that pattern. You'll run that play, so to speak, and kind of do their work for them.
And it can be in the sneakier approach. The example I'm thinking of for myself was at one point in a regular season of life, except for I think there'd been unemployment, he said, thank you for sticking with me and not divorcing me. And I've never thought about divorcing you. But suddenly a compliment I don't know how to describe it, but it was like, oh, well, I want to make sure that I've just been praised for something. Now I know what direction to move in order to, I don't know, gain that favor. And so now I'm actually being a better wife. I don't know if that makes sense. That sounds like it's hypercritical, but when you know the pattern, it does fit.
It's the push-pull. Mm-hmm. So you get the pull in toward them. You're getting the nurturing. You're getting the compassion. You're getting the intimacy of expression that you want to get from your spouse, the approval, the I want to be with you forever message, mm-hmm. And then you get the push. And the push is the backhanded part of it, or sometimes the overt, but it pushes you away from them. And then you want to get that pull back. You want to get the good feelings back. So you're being trained and you're willing to compromise more and more of yourself in order to try to get more and more of the pull, or more and more of that intimacy and closeness. But you're never going to. It's the purpose of them using the push-pull is to control your behavior, not to enhance intimacy, closeness, and a healthier marriage.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020. That's what I have to say.
With everybody, though,
Do you find yourself always seeking confirmation that the relationship is, quote, okay? Does absolutely everything feel uncertain if he's not given indicators that he's happy with you or your performance? And I kind of always blamed myself for that. Like, well, this must just be something wrong with me that I need this. But I don't need that in any of my other relationships, at least not currently. So I think that was something that was capitalized on. Like, might be a little bit moody, might be a little bit withdrawn, might be a little bit not responsive. Well, what's wrong? And then it would become apparent what would alleviate that mood. And so then you learn to cater to the things that make everything okay. And meanwhile, it's being used in order to manipulate you to stay in a place where you're catering to them, basically. Is there something he sparingly compliments but is with otherwise distant? So he maybe focuses on one aspect of your performance in the marriage and says, that's really excellent, but then seems distant and unrecognizing of the other areas. An example might be in a situation where he wants something from you, pushes for it, receives it, briefly praises you, but quickly returns to his dissatisfied demeanor.
That push-pull once again, yeah.
Does he ever accuse you of doing or being something completely contrary to your character? You're a liar, you're crazy, you're unfaithful, or you're rebellious? That one, my ex-husband stood up in our former church and announced to the church that I needed prayer because I had left him because I was rebellious and wanted to be independent. And nobody stopped him. So you should know me. That's not me. But that was said. I was also threatened numerous times, even after we had separated and been divorced, that he would seek to have me committed to a mental asylum because I was crazy to think that he was crazy.
Well, we would call that gaslighting, a term that most people would be familiar with now. 10 years ago, nobody even knew the term. Mm-hmm. But the idea of gaslighting, which is, it's not even a lie. It's you keep presenting something false over and over again with the intention that the victim will start second guessing, because we're social creatures and we want to be in accordance with proper alignment of proper social norms and values of what's going on around us, including in the home, including in the marriage. So when somebody keeps presenting over and over to you something that's not true, you'll almost adjust your way of perceiving reality in order to get in alignment with something that's not true. You know it's not true, but 2 months later, you're like, no, it was always this way. It was totally correct and totally normal. To kind of even go one thing that I've seen within women that can be abusive towards their husbands or their partners, but I just mean I saw this with women and boyfriends. Okay, the accusation of something that's so over the top, it's not possible. So what I mean by that is the boyfriend, girlfriend are out on a Tuesday and they end up running into somebody at the coffee house or whatever. And it's some girl and it's Janet or whatever. And they talk for 15, 20 minutes. Now that's Tuesday. Then Wednesday happens, boyfriend and girlfriend are together the whole time. Thursday happens, they're together the whole time. Friday happens, they're together the whole entire time. Then Friday night, she accuses him of having an affair with Janet. It physically is impossible. He was never away from the girlfriend or the abuser long enough to even do something like that. but the accusation still has, like, you have to defend against it, or you feel like it's a legitimate accusation. And by that I mean it's a legitimate confusion, or it's a legitimate misunderstanding. You feel there's some sort of legitimacy to it, and by interacting with it, you almost accept that was even a valid point to bring up in the first place. If you kind of see where I'm going with that. So it blends in the gaslighting, it blends in all this stuff and kind of together and shows up in this way where it's just crazy.
And I think when that's put out there, like, well, you were unfaithful, it's also in the backdrop of the accusation that you can prove to me otherwise by doing A, B, or C. I've heard that. It's not just my case where, well, this, if you had done this, this, and this, then I wouldn't have done this, this, and this. But it's not feasible. It's confusing.
Well, which is also part of that programming. So the push is the accusation, and then the pull is, I never would have thought that if you would have only this, this, and that. And then you start engaging in those behaviors because you don't want to go through this horrifying situation again where you're being accused of something super terrible you would never do.
Because usually if you're, I think the typical victim, it values being understood and values communication and connection. And so if you accuse me of something like being unfaithful, I'm like, well, no. And now I want to make sure that's not true. And I've got to prove it. And then I modify my behavior so that accusation can never come across again.
And you said it, I think, maybe at the very first episode. You have to recognize and have to understand if you're with somebody that is abusive, that it's not a misunderstanding, something that be corrected with conversation, maybe a therapist or something. We're talking a straight up narcissist, a sociopath, or even a psychopath. That there is no misunderstanding. The only one having the misunderstanding is you. There's no fixing it. There's no correcting it. There's no sorting out the record. There's no any of that. All of the behavior that you're engaging with and everything that Laura is talking about here on this list of real things that do happen, it's designed to abuse you. It's designed to manipulate you. It's designed to harm you. It's not a misunderstanding. You're the only one having the misunderstanding of where you're at. And it takes time to learn. It takes time to figure it all out.
And sometimes by the time you're seeing these more obviously showing up, he's already done. But it's this strange thing, I still don't understand it, where a person of this caliber of toxicity will play with their food, is what I call it. Like, they're done. They've been done for years. I can look back and I know when he was done, and I didn't see it for years. It's just this disregard. But then once you start to put up a fight, there's this punishment for it. It's just very weird. If I were done with a relationship, I would leave a relationship. I don't understand this torturing you before they let you out kind of thing. But that is incredibly common. Maybe you have an insight as to why that happens. I don't know.
I was going to crack a joke. It's like you just have that let's just be friends conversation, The resurgence of interest, the game is afoot, Holmes, old boy. It's something more like that where there hasn't, for the abuser, the pattern becomes boring or boredom. There is no new challenges. The challenges were about getting you to submit. And then after you submit, after you're in the routine, after it's predictable, they could literally go, well, in my head, all I have to do is say this, and inside of 3 days, I'm going to get X, whatever X is. They'll run that program to see if they're correct because they're a narcissist. They have to be right about everything. Once again, you want to know if you're with a narcissist, tell them no, or tell them better yet, they're wrong. And then hold the line that they're wrong. Never cave on that one. The behavior will escalate. It will escalate and escalate and escalate. So why? Probably something like that. The idea of the mouse that they thought they already killed, it actually started twitching again, and now they have interest in it, and they're going to start flipping it around to see where this goes or something. Once again, their goals are not like normal people's goals. Their interactions, they're not normal. They're almost like, try to think of it as like science experiments from which they feel they're immune from breathing in the poisonous gas that they're poisoning their victims with, or something like that. Like, there's almost no analogy or metaphor I can come up with just off the fly to try to describe that.
It brings to mind a book. My best friend had found it years ago and listened to it and said, "This is your story." And there's a few bigger differences by the end of it. It's called A Beautiful, Terrible Thing. I think I've had Kelly listen to that as well, and we'll put that in the show notes. It's one woman's basically autobiography of her experience with her husband and the crazy making that went on with that. So it's a very good resource if you're looking for a less technical book that you just might see it easier because it's portrayed in the background of a relationship. What were you going to say? Something?
A healthy person will look at another person, whether they're a sociopath or not, and they'll see a person there, and they'll think that they'll project onto them thoughts, feelings, and emotions like they have. And that's one of the ways that we interact with people. It's part of our empathy process. You need to have it. Otherwise, it's just bedlam. But you'll think that person has the same types of feelings and emotions that you have. They do not. Mm-hmm. And they interact with reality entirely differently than you do. And they're very good at presenting, copying, or mimicking normal human behavior. So when you see it, you imprint upon it and you place value, judge, like, if I did this, I would be feeling this. That's why I would do it. Therefore, my partner or my wife or spouse or husband or whatever must be feeling this also. Except that's not the case. And it's almost impossible to get out of that mindset until you have that break. At some point, someplace, there was that moment where you were on one side of the line right before that moment, that benchmark hit, and now you're on the other side, and now you can only see that side of it. If you waffle back and forth up until that moment, and then you hit that moment, you get on the other side, you look back and you go, oh, it was just psycho the entire time.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Having been that, my experience.
Sorry to laugh. The whole thing is just, it's so awful.
Well, I sent this list to you guys, and you're like, oh, wow, this is a terrible list. I was like, oh, I came up with those on my own.
Yeah, no,
from my experience.
not terrible like it was bad examples. Terrible is in like this is sad that people experience this.
These are your lived examples,
Is he charming socially? Do people generally believe him to be a really nice and humble man? My ex-husband was popular with young ladies when he was in high school. He was popular with the ladies in our college setting. He was popular with church ladies. He was popular with old ladies. Everybody liked him. He was the guy helping the little woman across the street, and he didn't let that go. It's not like we went home and then backhanded me. It's very hard to see when they're charming.
Real quick, with women, it'll show up a little bit differently. A lot of times, over time, they'll become more and more reclusive, more and more of a shut-in, using illness in order to control everyone inside the household and the family. They don't venture out as much. They don't socialize out as much. It'll be a lot more of trying to bring people into their environment that they can control. That way they can enforce and inflict the rules on others around them and the disapproval and dissatisfaction of their inappropriate behavior in the boundaries of X, their home or whatever it is. It just shows up a little bit differently. In many cases for men, they can be that outgoing, charismatic, fun, happy. Men tend to be a moving force out into the world, so to speak, whereas women tend to collect, gather, and bring into themselves. Not only does our physiology kind of reflect that, but it's also in alignment with the way that we socially behave as well as emotionally, psychologically. The character, it's like God knew what he was doing when he designed us,
I don't think that's true.
So it just shows up a little bit differently with abusive women.
I think that's interesting. I am an introvert and I like to be home by myself, but I don't want to draw anyone into my environment. I just want to be left alone. Just a note to everybody in the world. I don't like when people stop by. So I don't think I'm a sociopath. Check.
It's like I'm looking at Kelly. I'm like,
I'm just an introvert. Yeah. I'm not a psychopath.
Yes.
Kelly thinks that is the same thing, but it's not.
Us extroverts are a unique group.
You are unique. All right. Next on the list, does he seem indifferent to your suffering? This may be him not being attentive at all to you when you're sick or you're in a recovery from a surgery, almost seeming inconvenience to have to care for you. I remember once, I don't remember what I was crying about. I was sitting in the office and I'm sobbing about something that was going on in our lives, nothing related to conflict with us yet. And he kept playing his computer game and he kind of laughed, and I thought, in my mind, I thought, oh, this is what marriage looks like when you're this many years in. We're just kind of rolling with it. That wasn't what it was.
I just want to point out it looks usually opposite in women, because if the husband has a surgery or an illness, it's their chance to show how good they are, and they take care of him, they pamper him, they baby him. They're there every step of the way to get the praise and to put the blinders back on. See, nothing's wrong.
Look at how good of a wife I am.
Right.
And if other people will notice, too. Like, look how good she is at being a wife.
Right, and it feeds into that Munchausen syndrome, if that's the correct term for it, where they'll like poison their kids slowly, keep them sick all the time, so that way the eyes kind of go not necessarily on the child, but or on the wife or the mother because of the child. So it's a constant reflection of how good and caring you are. That, yeah, same thing, you know.
Also, does he have a family member who adores him and sees little fault in him? Was he raised being told he was special or gifted? It's surprising how often that one shows up. It's kind of creepy. Does he ever embarrass you in public? This can be making sexual comments about you or others, or it could also be being disrespectful to others, causing you what I call vicarious shame and discomfort. I think that happens in order for the wife to rather than oppose her husband with his bad behavior later, she's so concerned with keeping it under wraps that she kind of caters to keeping him happy enough that he doesn't do those things. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It can be kind of a subtle thing. Does he make comments that deplete your worth? You're only good for blank. If you died, I'd remarry someone better. I'm just staying with you until the kids are grown. Really, really nice things. Things to say on Valentine's Day.
Yay.
Is he disengaged with your children, uninterested in deep interaction and preferring his own hobbies over time with family? Does he exhibit jealousy, not necessarily over other men? It could be your children. It could be jealousy for other people who have something he feels is undeserved. So in that example, I mean, if there were war veterans who were getting honored, that was something that my husband would resent, like almost like a masculinity thing, like if women are getting more attention for not getting jobs or something, well, it's harder to be a man. There's just this, it needs to be, you're the greatest victim in the room or something. It's very just weird. Yeah.
Redirected, refocused back. I would argue they know they are insufficient, and they need to constantly be explaining why it's not their fault. They've got a raw deal or a bad shake, or somebody else is out to intentionally put them down. And therefore, you're noticing their insufficiency in one area, but for them, it's a larger context because they had the doting mother. Mm-hmm. They know that it's there, and they want to try to. They're explaining why it's actually not their fault, or if it's there, you shouldn't be paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. In with that too is, does he hold deep grudges over small offenses? I was amazed by the things that were remembered from 5th grade, that teacher should never have done this or that, and it was, whoa, what's that about? It can also show up in a little bit more resentment. There was, after my mom died, I was spending quite a bit of time helping my dad clear out the house and get things in order like that. And at one point, I don't remember what we fought about, but he was like, you just want to basically be with your dad. And, but in much nastier, crude terms. And again, it's that accusation of character where you're like, but I've always put you first. I've always made sure to separate and leave and cleave, because that's what the good wife does. And so what did I do? Seek to make sure that accusation could never be brought up again. So that's one of the ways it works.
Within abusive women, it shows up slightly differently, but very similar. It's I have written down here, punishes you for things that happened 15 to 20 years ago, and then leverages judgment against you for those things today. So it's like it just happened. It's like that thing, that mistake that you made, or the wrong thing that you said 20 years ago, or that clumsy way in which you tried to explain X 15 years ago. It was like you just said it, and it's just brought back up into the room, and it's going to be leveraged against you with just as much, quote unquote, you've inflicted pain and suffering on them, like it just happened.
Yeah, the long memory. Does he sabotage birthdays and other celebrations? So no gifts, unwanted gifts, sexual gifts. I remember getting to the point where I just asked for very specific things for Christmas because it was always these things I didn't want or like that. Like, I'm sorry, it's like buying a vacuum for your wife. If you buy some kind of weird sexual things or whatever, that's not a good gift. So I'm being very blunt about that because that is actually something that happens far more than people realize. That is not what you want for your birthday or Christmas. It just is weird. And so if that's happening, that's something I've seen, experienced. Is conversation with him confusing? This can be using a lot of words to distract in conversation, or it might be misdirection and deflection. Things like, I don't have a problem, but maybe we should have you institutionalized, like I mentioned earlier. Are you in a place where you don't feel you can trust your own judgment? There's an example for this. At one point, towards the end, before I knew everything, he had a theological push towards having multiple wives, and it felt real. Like he would be giving biblical explanation for why men should have the right to have more than one wife. Okay, in that, if your wife and your husband is subtly pushing this just in a theoretical conversation, it implies that you aren't enough. So you already feel that way. So you feel defensive and uncomfortable and replaceable. And then it was, well, this is how, Christ is the husband and he has many believers and that's his brides. So that's where it would fit for him, which it isn't accurate. I can dismantle that. But I would say, are you serious? I mean, we get to the, oh, no. I mean, it was just kind of like, oh, no, that you misunderstood the direction I was going with that. And it wasn't said even meanly or anything. And it was just kind of, but you're left with this uncomfortable feeling and you don't feel right or good. And you think, does he think that? But he's already dismissed it as like, oh, we're just having a theoretical conversation. But he'd built a very solid logic behind it. So you're confused. You always think you're not actually receiving right. It confuses you in such a way that you don't trust your gut reaction to something. You doubt it. And so it's reinforced over and over and over that you're actually not reading the situation correctly.
Yeah, it's the gaslighting.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we would call that what he's doing is putting up a weather balloon. So he's putting that up there into the atmosphere to see which direction the wind's blowing, how the response is going to be to gauge how much more work he's got to put into in order to slowly convince you. Can he push harder, quicker, faster? Or does he have to pull back and do it slowly over a longer period of time?
That is actually...
Yeah, that's what it is.
When we listen to this later, I'll probably just write that down and say, oh, that's exactly what happened. Now I have a sentence to describe it. Does he state outlandish or awful ideas, but do so in a calm, calculated manner? When there is conflict, does he try to control the narrative? This can be as extreme as my own experience, which I talked about, where he went and called all my family members afterward when we'd separated. Or is it can be just gaining a sympathetic audience with children. I've seen that with several different cases where a guy will perceive that the children might be lying with the wife and perceiving what's happening, and they will, in a separate conversation, try to lead it away from that. That happened more with us once we were separated, so that's something to look for. And that goes with this one. Has he worked to turn your children against you? That does happen. Is he lazy in the relationship? Are you the one pouring more into the marriage and large disproportion to what he's putting in? So it doesn't always look like he's pouring in nothing. It just looks you're doing more of the work. Is he either never apologetic or possibly adept at it, but lacks sincerity and change? You'll just start paying attention to what he looks like when he says he's sorry. There's a look people get in their eyes when they're genuine and when they're not. So when he's caught doing wrong, does he diminish both his behavior and your response to it? Is that a woman one?
I don't understand why this is such a big deal in the first place. Usually women will tend to redirect. And if you have an accurate point and that you're making, and even with, women in general, quite frankly, but also the ones that are narcissistic, it'll be a redirect. So it's more like this kung fu move of taking whatever they're saying at you, they wheel it around and then direct it back to you with like twice the energy. It's more like that. So you'll all of a sudden be on the defensive about something and it kind of is related, but not really. And that's one of the ways you know. You'll be like, what I'm being accused of right now is not what we started talking about. We started talking about something different. It's 2-3 steps away, but we got there too fast.
Yeah, I don't like that one. It's harder to see, and I saw him do it after the divorce with the kids, where something would come at him as an accusation and he was able to change the entire audience's focus to the kids to the point where they were just ripped apart in front of everybody. It was bad. Does he limit or strictly monitor how you use money? Do you have access to money? Is the spending of money an open discussion? That one is not actually one that I had. So I handled the finances. He resented me deeply for doing it better and for not allowing him to spend money the way he wanted to, but there was never a control thing. So that one is just simply from the books. Does he diminish your intelligence, education, or contribution to the household? This can look like saying things like, it's my money, it's not like you work when you're the stay-at-home mom. Has he instilled in you a fear of divorce? This may look like from early in the marriage throwing divorce out there. I guess I'll divorce you, or if you don't agree, we might as well get divorced right now, or in my case, you can return to your father, which again is just comical because if you knew my dad, he's like, I don't want her back. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see, what do we have? Do you see any emotional softness? So if you don't, that's a concern. Often when a wife has finally left the husband, when she has finally left, the husband appeals to her and others with tears. The audience to this will often remark that this must be genuine because I've never seen him be this sorry or cry. I get it that guys don't cry all the time, but if you've been married for 15 years, he's never shown any kind of remorse, any kind of softness, sensitivity, loss, anything, and then you leave him for abusing you, and then he's full of tears, that's actually the bad sign. You should have seen that 15 years ago, not just when he's losing the comfort of his home, his marriage, and you're accommodating wifedom.
When somebody is having a genuine emotional experience, on the edge of crying or tears, a lot of times there is a shaking of the voice. The shaking of the voice is very difficult to artificially create because there is an attempt to prevent a genuine emotional response, and it's in the prevention of that starts happening, and there's a vibrating almost inside the body. And so the point is that you can throw around crying and, she left me, can you believe it? But there's no quivering in the voice. There's no choking back. There's no attempt to restrain. And that's something that you can sense a lot of the time. So not all the time. People are good at stuff, but that's another sign. I've seen stuff like that. I'm like, man, there's no it's not right. Something's not right about that presentation. This is performed. Yeah. It's not genuine.
But it is in the normal person's perspective. It's normal. That would seem like you're sorry because the victim who functions with usually an overactive empathetic system thinks that's what I would do. I would be devastated. I would cry. And so we receive that as positive feedback when it's actually negative. Have you been given the silent treatment as punishment for saying no or expressing your feelings about something? Okay, so I'm kind of skipping through because some of these are repetitive. When I wrote them out, I wanted, it might be the same concept, but phrased in different situations might draw somebody's mind to see it quicker. So I was just telling Kelly earlier, I feel like the list is too long. She said we can do a connection. So we'll put these up so that you can access these questions if they're resonating with you as you're trying to figure out if you're with an abusive person. Does your husband avoid answering direct questions? So an example would be, I asked, have you ever looked at child pornography? And his answer was, I can't understand why anyone would be interested in that. It wasn't a horrified, it was a never no. It's not an answer. It's a something, but it's not an answer. But you think it is, but it's not. And you're left again with that same feeling, like I said earlier, where you're like, am I seeing this right? Like you're questioning what is pretty obvious when you can see it.
Yeah, it should have been like, no,
Yes.
like the disgust mechanism should have shown briefly in the face or something. Like it should have had more of a reaction.
I found this quote. It's from we mentioned it before, the 30 Techniques of Covert Narcissist Relationship something or other, which is a terrible butchering of the title, but Kelly will put that in there. Excellent book. The quote says, "A skilled manipulator can make you feel incredibly guilty for not doing something they want you to do by getting you to feel that you should do it, even if you really don't want to do it." I thought that one was good. So if that kind of makes you go, wait, that's how I kind of feel. That's where that's coming from.
That's it. Once again, that fear, obligation, and guilt. And it's going to activate that shame response.
I like the fog because that helps me remember. Because I feel fear, obligation, and guilt all the time, even when I'm not being manipulated.
Like, wait, am I manipulating myself? What's going on?
Totally. That's the conversation in my head. Am I a sociopath? Maybe I am.
I go back to the whole, like, I was trained to be a people pleaser by,
Yes.
my parents and
Yes.
stuff. And I'm just like, ugh, this all sounds too familiar,
Does he ever act as though you are overreacting to something big? So, for example, you discover porn and are upset, and the response is, "It's not a big deal. All guys do it," and you're being too conservative. I read that. I think that's in the 30 Tactics of the Covert Narcissist Relationship book. And I thought, oh, that was me. That does happen. Yes, it was. He went so far as, in fact, to go to work, talk to the two guys that I knew, they were from our church, and say, You don't think this is a big deal, right? Laura's overreacting. And I was, okay, now there's a couple things on the table. He's justified his behavior. He's made me feel ridiculous, but he's embarrassed me too because he's brought it up, and he's made me look like the ridiculous one.
And he's getting people on his side.
Well, I knew at least one of them was like, you're crazy.
But he was still, that was what he was trying to do.
Yeah, it's the intention.
And the other guy that he said it to felt sorry for him. He just felt so sorry for him. And, not necessarily about that statement, just that was the mood of that relationship during the crisis. Have you ever been very emotional over his behavior or even something else like a death, and he ignores your emotion or treats it lightly? Is their charm genuine? They may have a very easy way with words, but usually their smooth talk is not accompanied by any emotion that matches what they're saying. I can see this more before, like even his interactions with people in church and stuff. There's this tone. The body language is, "Oh, I'm so concerned for you," but there's just something there, like you know what it is to connect with somebody genuinely, and I can look back now and go, that wasn't happening. That's a little harder to see when you're in it, but that's when it's there. Another quote from that book, does this one feel familiar to anyone? "The manipulator will aim to intimidate you by putting on an act of intense, explosive anger in response to something you did or said for the purpose of shocking you into submission. This is called traumatic one-trial learning because it instantly trains the victim to refrain from repeating the behavior that caused the outburst. What might spark such a display of rage? It is usually something that confronts, exposes, challenges, or contradicts the manipulator." This one happened a lot. And it's hard because it wasn't like you get, like I said, you're not getting backhanded. But for somebody who grew up with an angry parent, doesn't like to get angry herself, and tries to avoid anger and confrontation at any level, when somebody will out and out just do something like that kind of out of nowhere, it does become a very strong learning experience. And then you learn you don't do that.
It is also a hypnosis / neurolinguistic programming technique. And what it does to the victim is you create a very loud, sudden noise or a very loud, sudden outburst of some kind, something that's not appropriate for the situation. Okay, so I'm not talking like you're at a construction site and you can use this technique. It won't work there, but it will work in a library. It will work in a kitchen, something like that. And what happens is that sudden, loud, sharp, surprising noise, the fight or flight mechanism gets activated in the victim. Commonly, it works best in women. It just is. Most women kind of flight versus fight. Okay, depending on the situation.
Or freeze.
Yeah, and what happens then is that it's almost like a hard reset of the computer or the hard drive. It's something like that where they immediately reset. The conscious mind resets, and it resets to try to calibrate and figure out the new information that just came in suddenly and what is the proper context for that. So while it's over there attempting to do that, the subconscious is then running the show. And there's a momentary window where you can input information directly into the subconscious of another person. And that's the technique. Now, there's ways in which it's done. It's not like, you light off a firecracker and go, you're going to give me $1,000. That's not what it is. But it's using neuro-linguistic programming techniques. You have a split second by which you can do that, and you'll almost see the person blink as they come out of it. The conscious mind takes over again, and they get reset. All I'm trying to say, there's actual science and mentalism. Daniel Brown in the UK would be an example of a person that does this kind of stuff. It's a real technique. It's a real thing. And that's not good, that either they intuitively pick up on doing this or it's learned. And most likely it's learned, which now you're talking somebody's intentionally going out and using these techniques for the purpose of manipulation.
It is the 30th tactic listed in this woman's book, hypnosis,
Ooh.
which I think is interesting because I don't actually know. I don't remember if you know this or not, but my ex-husband was very into hypnosis, to mind control, studied it extensively in the last couple of years, really wanted to hypnotize me.
That's not good.
Yeah. And it seems like it would be like this. That I always thought that was an outlying symptom until I read this book, and I was like, oh, this is something that I think could be characteristic of these patterns. So
that's the thing. There's doing it. There's learning mental tricks in order to be fun at parties, and then there's doing it in order to manipulate people in your daily regular life, and that there's a difference there. And yeah, that's not good. I'm just trying to validate it. It's just not good.
Yeah, no, I feel validated. Is there a distinct pattern of the pattern being conflict, loving action, conflict, and then that kind of rinse repeat? I believe some manipulators have a deep sixth sense about when their victim is either fed up with their behavior or catching on to it. This behavior is part of that push-pull theme that keeps you off balance and leads to not trusting your own perceptions of reality. So as soon as I've had it in my own experience, and I've had it with other women, when they meet with me, they'll say, oh, it's just so clear. I can see it clearly. I get it. I see what you're saying. Then they enter back in and they might make some kind of stand and say, okay, this is either that behavior is going to change or I'm leaving or something. Sometimes they don't even have to say anything. It's like the guy senses it and the next day buys flowers. I don't know how they know it, but they do. They figure it out. My husband never knew I was going to leave, but he did things that indicated he'd figured it out. He sensed something in me, like there's a resolve there or something. They're very intuitive with their manipulation. And that's something that's very difficult for me to understand. Because if you come up out of nowhere and you start having a manipulative conversation with me, I'm like, I'm not good at manipulating. I can't think of things fast. So we're easy targets.
There's something like 70% of all the communication we do with others is done through body language. So when the body language of the victim changes, and it communicates a lot. And so they can pick up on that. They can sense it. It might not be directly, they might not be able to point to it. Oh, they're starting all of their walking with their left foot instead of the right foot. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the subtleties, the cues. They pick up on these things. They become hyper aware of it because manipulators are always trying to get feedback from their victim of whether or not what they're doing is working or not. So they become hyper intuitive or hyper sensitive or aware of their victim's body language, and they can read that like the back of a Hardy Boys mystery or whatever. It's like they get very, very in tune to it. So the fact that these guys all of a sudden buy flowers the next day, or he knew something was going on, he just didn't know what it was, I'm not surprised to hear that at all. That would be in alignment with this behavior.
And the normal person says, do they sit up at night and plan this? But no, it's so instinctive to who they are. So I was just saying a second ago that when a manipulator comes to me, I'm kind of thrown.
Right.
So I have used it for myself, and I've used it for other women who get into situations where there's a confrontive situation and they kind of panic. And we don't manipulate back. We don't know how to. If you don't know what to say, I can give you one word and you can say it with any kind of tone, and it will frustrate them like nobody's business. If they start in any topic, anything, and they're picking a fight, they're just poking. You just say, okay, okay. And I can't remember how many conversations I had on the front step with my ex-husband where he would start this stuff and I would just be, okay. And they don't know what to do because words are toys. Don't give them toys to play with. Just say, okay. It's not agreeing to anything. It's just acknowledging you've said something to me. It does really work. And if you're a panicker like me, where my heart starts racing, like, I don't know how to defend myself right now. So that's just a little bit of practical. It's worked. I feel like pretty impressed that I somehow I figured it out. I don't know how. It started working, and that's my favorite thing to do now.
Okay is the Swiss Army knife word for the English language. It can mean almost anything that you need it to mean based on the inflection that you do. It's like that word, and then there's a particular swear word, for example. But we're not going to say that word. So, yes, depending on how you... Okay, in a bright and cheery, happy voice, or okay... Mm-hmm. Okay, it doesn't say anything, but it says everything, but it also doesn't say anything. It doesn't give the ammo.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break right here, and this is going to be a two-parter. So the next part will be out in just a couple of days, and join us, and Todd will go into more of what a manipulative, abusive woman looks like. Thank you.